Today we are going to continue the lecture on the governance models in a globally dispersed supply chain, and we will specially concentrate in this and next lecture on the orchestration model. First, what we would do is to do a recap of what we have done in the last two classes on the governance of global supply chain networks. Then I will introduce the orchestration model and some examples in the real world, like airlines, like print supply chains, like logistics and all that, where there are lots of orchestrators in principle, although they are not theoretically well studied. And we talk about an example of orchestration in supply chains and orchestration of small and medium enterprises, which is a very important topic, particularly in emerging markets like India, and orchestration in logistics. And one important thing in the agriculture markets in India is the mandi. The mandi is basically a place where it's a government controlled or government owned place where all the farmers come, and also all the retailers and others who want the fresh vegetables like onions, potatoes and other things. They come there, and there is a trading that happens in the mandi. So currently mandi is like a place where people come, it's like a marketplace, but if we can convert that into an orchestrator, it is going to be beneficial in several ways in India. Then we will talk about orchestration in print supply chain, and that is particularly for a bank we worked for. It's a very interesting example. Then finally, if you are following this kind of governance model where orchestration means you own nothing, you basically outsource everything, but you manage everything. So in the risks of orchestration and mitigation, both for the people who are with this one as well as for the orchestrators, and we will conclude this lecture. So let us do a recap of what we did in the last two classes. So we said, organization structure is something which basically governs the delivery process. In other words, after all, any network has to deliver products to the customers, and somebody has to specify what is the product and how it is to be delivered and so on. So all that is done by the governance structure. So identifies, manages relations with the government, trade, social groups, labor, resources, B2B, B2C delivery mechanisms. In other words, all the players, they have to be contacted and known. Then builds business models and relationships for growth enhancement. In other words, what is the kind of business model? Is it outsourcing? Is it doing it yourself? Or is it joint venture? What is the kind of business model that you want to follow? And then build systems for effective communication, collaboration and coordination among the network partners. It's very important that people should be on the same page for the kind of when they want to work together and so on. And identifies and categorizes the risks from various ecosystem sources and puts in place risk mitigation strategies in operation readiness. So there are several risks, as we have seen in the previous lectures, in the global supply chain that can happen. It can come from resources like oil price increases. It can come from the government, or it can come from various other sources. So in this kind of thing, is it possible to identify all the risks and then mitigate them. And for every customer order, select partners, allocate the tasks, responsibilities, and form the network. So the network formation becomes a very important thing, particularly once there is a customer order. You have to select the partners, tell them what to do and so on, and ensures labor laws and environmental standards are followed, because they are in a global supply chain. Basically there are a lot of this one need to be followed. manages the control room for monitoring the execution. After all, you may have the planning, but the planning need to be executed properly. So, the governance, partner selection and coordination and control are the three things. The governance means the partner selection, coordination and control. The supply chain is an inter-organizational network. A separate chain is formed for each order. Partner selection is based on structural features, relational ties, and coordination is determining who does what, when, and communicating to everyone. And execution is monitor order status so that the processes work as per plan. So, we have seen the definitions of this in the coordination, and we have seen this diagram where we select all the partners based on the requirements that we have, particularly the suppliers, logistics providers, manufacturers, and so on. Once there is an order, then you coordinate to find out who are the people best for that order. If the order is from the United States, you select those people so that the costs are minimum, and then finally execute the order. So, we said there are three types of governance models that can be followed. One is highly centralized external broker, that is also called an orchestrator, which we are going to talk about in this lecture. Second one is participant shared governance by elected board. This is very popular in dairies, cooperatives, and healthcare. And third one is participant shared by lead player, like producer driven, like Cisco, Nike, and so on, or buyer driven. So, we said all the three governance forms are in practice and are not proved to be superior. So, let us look at the orchestrator model in this detail. So, what is an orchestration? If you look at the traditional business, it is an organic expansion and acquisition. In other words, you basically either have all the assets, you want to build new assets, and to grow through acquisition, you buy them. So, you own all the assets that you need, but that is the traditional business. But the need to know assets, when the physical ones or intangible ones, is what makes the traditional growth model risky. In other words, you have to invest a lot of money into the assets, building up other, let it be human resources, let it be buildings or machinery, whatever. When you have the assets, you want to invest on front and payoff comes later. So, the leveraged growth or the orchestrated model mobilizes the needed assets existing within other companies. It is important, you need not have to own all the assets. You don't own all the assets, but you orchestrate their growth. So, all the needed assets within other companies to support your own growth initiative. Developers using contractors on marketing. So, for example, these are the examples. Traders use contract manufacturers. Control room in another country orchestrating terrorist attack in another country. So, basically, whenever there is something good, something bad also can be done. There are a lot of orchestration that goes on in terrorist attacks. So, what is orchestration? Orchestration are learning organizations with privileged relationships. So, their employees may never touch a product. Such organizations mobilize other companies' assets and capabilities to deliver value to the customers. Leveraged growth captures economic benefits while avoiding the economic burden of asset ownership. Orchestrators must be competent at recruiting the right providers, capturing right modules, and overseeing the performance of the network. So, basically orchestration is you own nothing, but you manage the product delivery through this, through your relationships and so on. So that's where you should have enough competent people to recruit right providers and do the right kind of things and overseeing the performance. After all, the reputation, if something goes bad, the reputation of orchestrator also goes bad. So, roles of the network orchestrator. There is this one is a network architect, selects number of companies that make up the business network, and network judge, orchestrator is the key interface for the end consumer. So, to make sure that the network output is promised one, the orchestrator sets, monitors, and adopts the performance standards. So, in other words, once the performance standards for each one of these partners has to be set by the orchestrator, and network developer develops the network's physical and non-material assets, including knowledge acquisition, knowledge transfer across member firms, and creation of strong brand image. And he is also a charismatic leader. It creates and manages rich texture of interactions in the network, taking a long-term view of the relationship, and expect partner companies to do likewise. So, basically, you are managing, but in the managing you should have some capabilities. What are those capabilities? Architecture, you have to be a judge, you should know what is the performance of the total system and what should be the performance of the individual system so that the total performance is reached, and you should also develop the physical and non-physical assets for knowledge acquisition and all that, and you should be a charismatic leader. So, because you know the interactions, people should listen to you. Why should anyone listen to you unless so you should provide enough incentives, and you should have enough market power so that people listen to you. So, basically what we are looking at is an orchestrator who owns nothing but manages and tries to build up a business. So, for such a kind of people, then these four are the qualities that are needed. But orchestrators and partners succeed or fail together. So, it is important for people to realize, although you don't own anything and there is no risk of assets, but there is always a risk of your reputation and also a risk of your business failing. So, what is the value of orchestration in global supply chain? Value in traditional firms comes from owning assets, specialization, owning skills in specific areas, protecting trade secrets, and keeping out rivals and even partners. So, it is about so-called competitive advantage, you know, either your assets or your soft skills, whatever. But what about in orchestration? The value of orchestration in manufacturing and service comes from leadership, integration, targeted performance, bridging borders, and leveraging companies' connections and knowledge across the network. So, what is your competency? Your competency is connecting to others' competencies. In other words, if you have to make a product, you find out what are all the competencies needed for the design, for the manufacturer, for the distribution, for retail, and for selling it in the market, and so on, and then you connect to the appropriate people. That's your competency. So, let us look at some of these examples of orchestrators in this. And the orchestrators are, for example, in the real world, a contractor of a large commercial building. Supposing there is an airport or a seaport that is built, the construction project orchestrates a broad array of highly specialized service providers for construction, electrical wiring, fitting, plumbing, interior decoration, furniture design, security systems, and all that. He may not have all the capabilities but he can orchestrate. He subcontracts and orchestrates this. So, basically a contractor may not have any of these capabilities, but he has the connections. And a cement producer orchestrates complex process required to make a movie. A cinema producer orchestrates the complex process required to make a movie. So, in the movie producers or the directors, they only know this one, they don't have the script, they get the actors and everybody, and they may not own the studios, they rent the studios, and they rent the cameraman, and finally make the movie. In an apparel business, the Li & Fung provides a powerful example of a new kind of sophisticated orchestrator coordinating a very broad process network. You know, Li & Fung basically takes 6 weeks what others take for more than 6 months. in terms of orchestrating and supplying design, from design to delivery. It takes only 6 weeks in apparel, this one, and finally in fashion business. So there are several examples even in our daily world that contractors, cinema producers, apparel manufacturers, who are basically orchestrators. And one of the very important examples in the agri-food network is Olam International. Olam International evolved as a global leader in agriculture communications. It's based out of Singapore from a small Nigerian company. So basically what Olam International does is it collects all the material from the farmers and it supplies to the big stores. So in other words, if they have cashew, they collect it to farmers, clean it and package it, and then finally supply it to the people in various forms. And this is true for, it does it for all the fruits, dry fruits to other things. So it doesn't own any farms but orchestrates a network of small producers. And Olam International Limited supplies raw and processed agriculture commodities grown mainly by small and medium sized producers in developing and emerging countries to regional and international countries. So it takes from Africa, India and other places, from small farmers, and basically takes these things, packages them, sometimes processes them like drying, and so that they last long, and puts them in a temperature sensitive environment and supplies it to international customers or retailers. Olam directly engages in sourcing. In other words, it sources the vegetables, and processing, transport, warehousing and distribution of broad range of commodities, including cocoa, rice, timber, cashew nuts, cotton, coffee, sugar, sesame, shea nuts and spices. So these are items. What it does is it collects from the farmers and basically processes them so that they are all cleaned and hygiened, and transports them, warehouses them and distributes them to various kinds of retailers. And Olam is supplier to many of the world's most prominent brands, offering reliability, consistency, trust, traceability and other value added services. Now in food products, one of the very important things is adulteration or some kind of contamination. So adulteration is done with the knowledge of the people who are doing it, whereas contamination may happen without the knowledge of the suppliers. So traceability is very important. If you have an item, a package which is of cashew nuts or whatever, or some spices, and if some food poisoning happens, it should be possible to trace up to the farm where it came from. And this is also true with other kinds of items, but Olam basically supplies only agriculture commodities. So there is another very popular this one, which is in the airlines. Now many of us think the airlines own the aircrafts, they own the staff, they own this one and all that, but it is not true. Major airlines were asset intensive and own aircrafts, reservation systems, maintenance teams, baggage crews and catering services and all that. But this is one way, of owning everything. But there are several other examples of recent times. For example, Southwest, JetBlue and Ryanair retain only the core of branding. In other words, they use only the reservation systems on the internet and they basically have some staff to run the aircraft and help the passengers. But together options, they lease the engines, the aircraft, and contracted out the baggage handling, maintenance, etc. So they own nothing else other than the passenger reservation system, and also the staff like the pilot and the people in the aircraft to help the passengers. So the passengers, you may go there is no seat allotment. Whoever goes first gets the seat. So these are the kinds of things. But what I mean is they are just like they take, as I told yesterday, but they basically took this one out of the bus, city bus transport, intercity bus transport. They took a leaf out of that and tried to arrange this. So here they are just basically orchestrating the entire thing, but they are not owning any one of these things. So, but then Southwest, people like Southwest have a lot of, or JetBlue has a lot of reputation. How did they get that reputation? Because they were able to orchestrate very well. They have the connections with others, and their aircraft maintenance, everything is done properly, and passengers are taken care, although they are not supplied food on the aircraft and all that, but the aircrafts are clean and they're on time, and so on. So basically there are other things what the passengers look for. They have those things. And to ensure that planes fly on time and maintain their safety records required orchestration skills, particularly when the business processes were not fully owned by the carrier. So when you don't own this one, for example, the repair and maintenance of the aircraft, you don't own the aircraft. So the maintenance teams may say, oh, the aircraft is owned by somebody else. So like Boeing, and so Boeing has to tell us. So there could be a lot of administrative and other kinds of problems, and so the connections of the people and others it becomes very important. While the success of these carriers rightfully attributed to their distinctive strategic positioning, this positioning depended on the skills in network orchestration. So basically trying to find out, like the network judge the performance, this one, I mean, if you look at all the 4 qualities applied to the airlines, so what is that the passengers expect, and what is that should happen at various places. So all your partners, from the passengers expect safety. So for the safety, the passenger should, that safety comes here from the aircraft and the airline carriers, the airport people, and they also expect good behavior from the staff and all that. So they get all that. So in the network orchestration, basically your strategic advantage comes in connecting right people and make them behave well, so that you are successful and they are successful. So what are the talents needed for this? One is deep domain knowledge, whether it is airline business or construction business or logistics business. Detailed understanding of the practices, processes followed, being coordinated, including the IP issues, and building capabilities for management, for procurement, for acquisition, for partner selection, monitoring, supervision, and visibility across the entire value chain. So whatever business you are in, I mean, one thing is you may not own the assets, but you have to manage the delivery of, or the delivery process of your products through the value chain to somebody else's assets. That's where the problem is. You don't own the asset, somebody else owns it, but your product goes through them. So you should have the right kind of connection so that you get a priority, you are not treated badly, and you get the right kind of service that you require. And relationship management, developing and maintaining trusted relationship with customers, suppliers, service providers, governments and employees. So take the ecosystem that we have learned and find out who are all the people for your vertical and have a relationship with them. This could be the government, state governments, the city, municipality, or it could be the doctors in a hospital, or it could be the oil suppliers, it could be the educational institutions, whoever it is, you should have a good relationship management. And capabilities to identify, continuously redesign and manage processes to the changing market needs. So it's important that you realize that the market changes. So when the market changes, you should basically redesign and manage your processes. So recruiting the right talent, training, mentoring them with appropriate performance evaluation tools. So since you cannot do it alone, whoever is the orchestrator is a company. Company means employees. So it has to recruit the right kind of talent. And the talent here is much different from the talent in an ordinary vertically integrated company. Here the orchestration skills are different. There are basically a lot of soft skills that are required. It is not as though you're machining a particular product on a NC machine, but here you are dealing with people and you are trying to make things happen, and you are trying to deal with organizations which are basically you deal with them but you don't own them. Now, one of the examples is, where there is a saying that when there is this Sagar Mathana happened, there is the Amrita that came as well as the Halahalam. So whenever there is a good thing, either technology or a practice that comes, there is both good and bad that happen. So one of the things is that happened and which shook India was there were 10 men attacked the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel in Mumbai, November 2008, and they executed one of the best orchestrated, most technologically advanced terrorist strikes in history. So there were 10 people outside. The whole of India, Taj Mahal Palace inside, they entered that. And before the assault, they had used Google Earth to explore 3D models of the target and determine optimal entry and exit routes, defensive positions, and security posts. See how they have used the technology. During the melee, they used BlackBerry, satellite phones, GSM handsets to coordinate their command center. So there is a command center which monitored broadcast news and internet to provide real-time information and tactical direction. So when these people were there through the satellites, there is an orchestrator somewhere else. It could be in Mumbai, it could be somewhere else in other country and so on. God knows where the other orchestrator is. But the orchestrator has access to information which these people do not have. What is that information they have? They watch the TV news and also other real-time information. So when a bystander tweeted a photo of a commander's rappelling from the helicopter onto the roof, one of the buildings, the center alerted the attacks and would set up a trap in the stair wall. In other words, there was a helicopter which was dropping soldiers onto the hotel top. And this basically is visible to somebody outside. So he took a photograph and tweeted it, and they got access to that, and they know somebody is dropping down and they put a trap. So it took 3 days for authorities to kill 9 of the terrorists and arrest the 10th, which has resulted in 163 deaths and 100 injuries. There were resources which could have addressed this problem. We are talking of 2 orchestrators here. One is the terrorists who are inside. They were very well orchestrated. But we are talking the people, the safety from outside, the Indian Army, police and the people. So there were resources that could have addressed this problem naturally, but they were not in the right place, not under the right authority. Governance is missing in the Indian side. So the point is, how do you go and handle these kind of organized crimes? So the people is control room orchestrating the Mumbai attacks, stocked with computers, televisions, voice over internet phones from a foreign company and satellite phones. Top commanders of the terrorist organization have set up a control room from where they controlled and directed the Mumbai carnage. The terrorist organization may have set up a remote command post in a safe house or a hotel in India, or make believe it is some other country. So maybe we don't know where it was. The phone handlers made the attack interactive, relaying reports about television coverage to the gunman. So you can see that this is a short 2-day affair, but this has happened in India, and the control room, so called this one, was basically highly interactive. It was trying to get information from the TV and other news sources. Maybe there are other terrorists who are outside taking photographs and tweeting to the control room, so that the control room can direct the terrorists inside. So if we can see, when we were talking about cyber security of somebody trying to attack your computers, put virus and so on, the nature of war is also changing, is becoming not only technology intensive, it is also becoming the governance of this nature of war is also changing from the command centers like the army to orchestration of various kinds of groups who are placed in different places and so on. So let us look at orchestration in the supply chain, this one. What happens? Now, what is supply chain? Supply chain, you have suppliers, a group of them, this one, and they could be co-located, or they could be in different places in a country. They could be in China, India, Hong Kong, and so on. And there are, of course, manufacturers. And between the suppliers and manufacturers, you can see the supplier is connected to all the manufacturers and so on. So this is arbitrary connections, but there were connections between them. But what happens is, if the manufacturer, say, is in Singapore, and if the suppliers are in China, Bangladesh, or India, and so on, it may not, some of them are connected, some of them are not connected. And the third party logistics providers who transfer the goods from suppliers to the manufacturers and so on, they are also there, and some of the manufacturers are connected to them. And of course, there are distribution centers and consumers. There are various consumers. These consumers are all in different countries, and there are distribution centers. Now, the point here is, you have somebody here, whoa. This fellow has strong connections with all of them. Now, whereas you can see that this is a sequential connection. In other words, some of the manufacturers may know the suppliers, but the distributors may not know who the suppliers are, or the consumers may not know who supplied what are the components and so on. Right? But on the other hand, if the supply chain delivery process, somebody has to know everyone, so that the entire process is very well orchestrated. So here, orchestrator is highly embedded in the supply chain. Almost all actors interact with it. So this fellow Wu is the orchestrator here, and he is highly embedded and he knows everybody. This is like Li and Fang in the apparel supply chain. The relationship between the focal firm and Wu represents a strong tie. These are all strong ties. Yeah. In the sense, providing access to valuable resources that in this case are the benefits arising from Wu know-how and relationships. So each of them they benefit from the relationship of these people. So if this manufacturer wants some supplier, then this fellow knows this group of people here. So he can help selecting. Or if this fellow wants, if somebody comes, some consumers or this one want the orchestrator to design a product or a shoe or a shirt or a pant or several of them, then since he knows all these uses connections, he can maintain the supply chain. So here if you look at the orchestration, you should, what is that orchestrator does? Planning, coordination and overall responsibility. Overall responsibility means execution. So that's what the orchestrator does. Now, what are the kinds of capabilities that you have apart from, we are always talking about talent and so on, but there should be other capabilities for planning and coordination and all that. It has to have all the information from all the sources. It should have the computing capability. It should have a communication network. It should be able to receive information as well as communicate to other this one. So this is a control room which basically has information about this. And here what do you have? You have suppliers, third party logistics, contract manufacturers and so on. We are talking of the supply chain model. Now what the orchestrator does is the end customer sends an order. Once the end customer sends an order, then the orchestrator will contact all of them and find out what is the operational status. In other words, if the end consumer wants a particular product in so many numbers, what is the capacity that is available from these people? So if the capacity that's available is less than what the orders require, then they may have to have 2 suppliers or 2 contract manufacturers, and also 3PL may have to make 2 visits and so on. So the operational status is an important thing from this. And the second one is, depending on the operational status, he makes plans and then he sends, this is the coordination step, and sends it to each of these people, the order. And then it goes into the material flow and the payment. So the payment happens, once the materials flow, the payment happens and the payment is done to all the people. So suffice it to say here, this the orchestrator has the planning, coordination and execution responsibilities here, and he has this control tower or a boardroom or whatever, where he sits and manages the product delivery through all this. So the end customer, he has to pay after receiving the materials and so on. So that's the kind of thing that the orchestrator business model does. So let us look at the orchestration of the SMEs. What are SMEs? SMEs are small and medium enterprises. They don't have much financial capabilities. They may not have much connections. So they develop, maintain, continuously upgrade the SME network in response to the market requirements. Now, so if you are in either an apparel business or agriculture business, or you are in toy business, these small players, you have to develop, maintain and continuously upgrade these people. So depending on the market. So if you are in the global, if you want to integrate them into the global value chain, you have to say what are the requirements of the global value chain in terms of the apparels, in terms of the toys and so on. It could be Barbie doll, it could be some other doll. Whatever the doll, what are the requirements and what are the machinery that is required and what are the skills that are needed for all this. recruit and develop service providers into the SME network. You have to basically get this and identify players in the ecosystem, customers, government, and develop strategic relationships. Cultivate a deep understanding of the underlying business processes and practices in the vertical. If it is a Barbie doll manufacturer, toys manufacturer, one has to understand what is the important processes that are involved in terms of the procurement, and how many countries it is going through, and what are the regulations that countries face, and how do you transport them by ship, by truck, whatever, and so on. So basically you have to understand the procurement, manufacturing, and the distribution business processes and what are the practices. Define standards with SMEs for communication, coordination, and execution. So you have to connect with them. Structure tangible and intangible incentives for SME participants. So when they participate, you should give them incentives. So what are the kinds of incentives? So I mean, the point is, these are small players here, and for the small players, they don't have a global this one. You are getting them, giving them a global order, and you should mentor them, and so that they work well and communicate, coordinate with them, and so that your order is delivered well. And for people who are doing well, you should provide them incentives. So develop and manage performance feedback loop to facilitate learning about individual SME performance and risk profile. So basically, in other words, as an orchestrator, when you are dealing with SMEs who are skilled and semi-skilled, then one has to be careful in terms of mentoring them and making them understand all the processes and the importance of being this one. What are the operational roles here? For a customer demand, unbundle the service and dynamically compose a service chain involving multiple service providers. In other words, you have basically every service, let it be a Barbie doll or let it be providing some kind of a service in a hospital. You can basically dissect the entire thing into a set of tasks. So for each task, you unbundle into tasks and compose a service chain. In other words, where is it done what? Like a Barbie doll, you do it a portion here somewhere, the structure somewhere, and the clothes somewhere else, and so on. All this you have to basically write even for a service chain. In the logistics, for example, you have to collect it and put it in a warehouse, load it, unload it, and put it on a truck, and transport it, and finally deliver it. So every chain, service or service chain can be decomposed into various tasks. And identify the quality suppliers, help them design and manufacture products meeting stringent delivery requirements despite poor quality infrastructure. You should understand most of these countries are in emerging markets like India, China, and so on. Whereas although the companies may be good, but the surrounding infrastructure like logistics and information technology and other things could be poor. So you should work, instead of complaining about the poor quality infrastructure, you should work with the poor quality structures to do it. Identify checkpoints, targets, deadlines, and interfaces for each of the activities in the service chain and monitor at the higher level whether these are met. So, and monitor and handle exceptions so that the final service delivery is not affected. Supposing you are making a doll, something happens and there is more lead on this one in the paint. So you have to abandon that and then do a fresh one, so that all the conditions safety is ensured. So these are the operational roles of orchestration. So if you look at the orchestrator, this one, you have an orchestrator here. This is for the supply chain. You have the client, and you sit with the clients, and then you try to try to get what is the kind of the product you want, and you get the design first. So once you have the design, this one, then the orchestrator, you communicate with the designer and you will find out what are the kinds of materials that are needed for this. So once you have the materials, then you have to source the materials. So the sourcing of the materials is an important task that is basically done. So with the suppliers, that's where, for example, if you are talking of an apparel, then you have to source the dyes, you have to source the cotton, you have to source the zippers, you have to source the buttons, various other kinds of the hood for if you are talking of a jacket, and so on, the cloth and others, and sewing and so on. So you have to basically get the materials and the services people in this. And then you choose the factories where these are being made, and you have to basically ensure quality control. What is the quality control requirements, that how is the quality control being ensured in recent times? The quality control is, in earlier days, the people used to visit the factory and be in the factory and check the quality online as the product comes out. But nowadays people are using the video conferencing things, and also whatever data that is come down, whatever measurements, quality measurements that are taken, all the quality measurements are emailed, or they are put on the web, and people can read, analyze and find out the quality. Instead of the visit to the factory, on-site visits have reduced in recent times, and people use either video conferencing or remote machine data mining to assess the qualities here. And this, of course, there is logistics. There is logistics in terms of procurement when you are sourcing the material. There is logistics when you are transferring the material to the distributors, and also to the consumers and so on. So when you are talking of this kind of orchestration, whether it is dolls, whether it is food or this one, it's sometimes very important to look at all the other aspects of here in this. One is the logistics. You have inbound logistics, that is the material sourcing to the factories, and from the factories to this one is outbound logistics. But there is what is called reverse logistics, or when there are called product recalls. In other words, if you want to have green technologies in this. So if you want to be green, what you usually do is you have what is called the reverse logistics. The product is collected from the customer. The product is collected from the customer and it is sent back to the factories. So this is called the reverse logistics, and this also happens in case of product recalls. Supposing that there is a problem with a particular product, let it be an automobile or a doll or whatever, and or a pet food. There is, whenever it is detected that there is something wrong with it, these products are recalled. Now recall means from the customers, it has to go back to the factory or to the site where it is, and there will be all sides of government regulations and inquiries and other kinds of things that happen. So people have to be careful in also getting the reverse logistics in place, because something can go wrong in here. And this happened in Mattel, which is a Barbie doll company, because there were child deaths due to when they lick the paint and on the doll, then some people developed some kind of problems, and this was complained, and there were a lot of product recalls, and Mattel, the company, got a very bad name. So the issue here is that when you are doing everything, you are in control of all the things, but when you are outsourcing and when you are just managing, you have to be extremely careful about the safety and also whether people are following the product specifications, the right kind of products, and so on. So if you don't do it, then you will get into problems, because if your partners by mistake put a lead paint, then if the child gets sick, then you will get hit. So as we said, the orchestrator takes responsibility for all the products that are delivered, and to that extent he should be being the managed. So although they don't own any of these assets, but the responsibility increases, because to make people work for you when you don't want them is more difficult, and that requires soft skills.